think there's one thing we can all agree on, which was 2020 was an absolutely terrible year. And the reason for it was this guy, the SARS-CoV-2 pathogen. And in fact, we have lost collectively as a species $16 trillion. What is that? That is equal to 90% of the US annual gross domestic product. But more importantly, we lost 3 million people. Many millions moved back into extreme poverty. In this time, as we've dealt with trying to get out of this virus, we haven't really spent the time to think about how did we get here. And the answer to that lies in our misuse of nature. We need to think about the upstream factors for why pandemics arise, and what is the nexus between things like wildlife trafficking, such as this wet market in Indonesia, environmental degradation that we can see here on the border between Bolivia and Brazil, or climate change. These aren't new concepts. Even the Romans knew about the links between climate and disease because they would retreat to the hills around Rome during their hottest seasons to avoid the mosquitoes that gave them malaria. Planetary health is part of the debt that we are accruing because of our misuse of nature, and it is becoming due, as we've seen this last year. And the situation isn't going to actually get better. We see as billions of people move in the middle class, the demand for protein, for cooling technology, air conditioning and refrigeration, for plastics that are in our clothes, the fibers that we use, the materials, the consumerism that we have, the electronics that we use, that all of these things will add to that debt. We know by 2050 that we'll have 9.7 billion people on this planet that will require 70% more food. 70% more food means 1 billion hectares of new land that needs to be cleared. To give you an idea of how much that is, the United States is 950 million hectares. That means we're going to have to clear the Amazon basin and the Congo basin to feed the planet, unless we come up with better solutions to be able to do so. And this is because billions of people are demanding and wanting things like protein from beef and from pork. It not only means the clearance of our forests, but it's the pollution of our waters. Because that 70% more food also requires us more than double nitrogen, double water use, to triple phosphorus, and triple the number of pesticides that we're using around the world. Our supply chains also have consequences as a result of the incredible consumerism and the demand for consumerism that increases as people become wealthier. The very technologies that we're actually watching this talk on right now are technologies that have supply chains that reach back into some of the most biodiverse places on Earth. Some of the most places like the heart of the Peruvian Amazon in Madre de Dios province on the border with Bolivia. This is literally the ground zero of biodiversity. 200-foot trees, jaguars, macaws, lianas, some of the most verdant landscapes on Earth. It is also a place where 30,000 miners in 3 years cleared 15,000 hectares looking for gold. Gold that's used in our electronics, that's used in our jewelry. And that process has resulted in those trees being cut down, the landscape literally being turned into sand, and then 1/3 into pits and ponds of water that are now polluted with mercury. And in fact, this type of gold mining, artisanal scale gold mining, which is sometimes illegal, unorganized, and informal, but driven by our demand, is the largest source of mercury pollution in the world. And it directly goes from these unorganized communities through the same networks that are involved in environmental crime and trafficking in persons, drugs, and weapons into some of the biggest companies on the planet today. Our consumerism has consequences. Our desire for fast fashion means that we are putting microfibers into our water and microplastics through the products that we're buying. Microplastics can now be found in our table salt, in our tea, in 94% of US tap water. It's in our beer, for God's sakes. And it is because of that demand. Even natural fiber clothing can be wrapped in plastics. And people are eating a credit card a week of microplastics. Bon appetit. Our problem in conservation is that we've been focused on a little stream to the side of the Mississippi. The Mississippi is our economy. It is that flow of goods, and we need to change the rivers and the oceans rather than the streams to be successful. I got into conservation to actually understand extinction, to understand the behavior of extinction, why certain species survive, other species disappear after environmental change. And I spent 3 years living in the rainforests of Madagascar studying lemurs to understand these models. I moved on to help build national parks in other places around the world, moving from lemurs to snow leopards, and helped create the first national park in Afghanistan. And yet all this time, I was doing what we've been doing in conservation for the last 36 years, which is this idea of a return to something that in some ways doesn't really exist. A return to Arcadia, a utopia of unspiled wilderness, of the idea that humans are not part of the nature that we're actually trying to protect. And how has that worked for us? By addressing the symptoms of conservation rather than the underlying drivers, we have not been successful. We've been exponentially successful in creating protected areas and laws, but we haven't been successful in actually protecting the species that we've gone out with. We've been successful in creating endangered species lists and spent a lot of time on that, but we haven't actually ranked the solutions we need to come up with to address these problems. Conservation, in fact, lost in 2020 3 of the greatest leaders that it had. Michael Sule, Norman Myers, who came up with the concept of hotspots, Georgina Mace from the Zoological Society. And they had founded conservation. Michael Sule was the godfather of conservation as a crisis discipline and a solutions-oriented discipline. But the fact is, in the last 36 years, it hasn't yet been either of those things. And in fact, it's depressing. If we look at the titles that are coming out on sustainability and conservation, they are such as Learning to Die in the Anthropocene, The Water Will Come, Rising Seas and Sinking Cities, Field Notes from a Catastrophe, Scatter, Adapt, and Remember, The Uninhabitable Earth. And my favorite, We're Doomed, Now What? But I'm optimistic, and I think we should be too. Because much as we've created the problems, we have the means to do it. And this requires a reframing of conservation, of moving beyond what I call conservation 3.0, solving the underlying drivers of extinction rather than its symptoms. And that means broadening what we're doing to not only building national parks, but thinking about those drivers in terms of food security, in terms of health, in terms of everything that we are doing under the Sustainable Development Goals. It also means that we can't just focus on the incremental solutions, but have to focus on the revolutionary solutions that match the speed and the scale of our problems. That's why myself and my co-founder and my friends have created Conservation X Labs. We saw a need for an Institute for Creative Technology. We saw the need to use both directed innovation, so directly building tools, as well as open innovation, harnessing a global community of solvers, harnessing planetary genius to solve these problems. And we saw the need to focus on engineering replacement and resilience and restoration and enforcement and extinction. Let's look at the first. Some of the solutions we've got through running these prizes and challenges have involved extraordinary breakthroughs. We know the problems of shrimp, that if you are eating shrimp, that you are looking at potentially 15 to 20 pounds of bycatch that are thrown away for every pound of shrimp that's caught. We also know farm shrimp causes mangrove deforestation, disease problems, that the shrimp industry has involved issues such as slavery. And it was through one of these competitions that we saw New Wave Foods, which was created by 2 women, a material scientist and a marine scientist, working together to create shrimp out of red algae that's now both vegan and kosher, as well as not having the bycatch, slavery, or mangrove deforestation problems. For this reason, we've run the Global Cooling Prize with the Indian government and Rocky Mountain Institute to allow for a 5-fold increase in room AC efficiency. And what we found in this competition is actually that we've been able to get to 10x increases in efficiency to address what Project Drawdown said is the best solution for actually addressing global climate change. 10x increase in room AC, if we can scale that up globally because it saves governments and individuals money, is the equivalent of taking off the emissions of Australia and Finland. It will help us make a difference. We've been running the Global Artisanal Mining Challenge and are also working on challenges with the fashion industry on creating new bio-based alternative materials, harnessing the talent of the global community. And most recently, we've been also thinking about enforcement. How do we actually develop new tools? If you eat seafood today in the United States, it is likely 33% of the time you're not getting what you paid for. If it's red flounder, red snapper, it is 9 times out of 10 that it's likely to be mislabeled. That seafood fraud not only cheats consumers and harms consumers, but it actually undercuts conservation efforts. So we know that 90% of US seafood is imported, but only 1% is tested because people don't have the time and the resources to test them in molecular labs. We need a tool that actually works on the front lines of conservation. That could be as simple as something that my 3-year-old son could actually use. We need something that allows for real-time diagnostics by anyone, anywhere, anytime. And this is one of the tools that we've been working on. It allows us to actually address wildlife trafficking, seafood fraud, and invasive species. But we realized in March of this year that we could also use it to detect COVID, to allow a test that's battery-powered, that works at home, that actually is as sensitive and specific as a laboratory tool, could help us prevent spillover from the next pandemics from happening and not having another year like 2020. We're about to see the first powered flight on another planet, the Ingenuity drone. And the fact is that if we can create solutions like this, we can create solutions to end the grand challenge of extinction. Thank you.